The True Believer, Thoughts on the Nature of Mass Movement by Hoffer, Section 86. There is hardly an example of a mass movement achieving vast proportions and a durable organization solely by persuasion. Professor K. S. Latourette, a very Christian historian, has to admit that however incompatible the spirit of Jesus and armed force may be, and however unpleasant it may be to acknowledge the fact as a matter of plain history, the latter has often made it possible for the former to survive. It was the temporal sword that made Christianity a world religion. Conquest and conversion went hand in hand. The latter often serving as a justification and a tool for the former. Where Christianity failed to gain or retain the backing of a state power, it achieved neither a wide nor a permanent hold. In Persia, Christianity confronted a state religion sustained by the crown and never became the faith of more than a minority. In the phenomenal spread of Islam, conquest was a primary factor and conversion a byproduct. The most flourishing periods for Mohammedanism have been at the times of its greatest political ascendancy, and it is at those times that it has received its largest accession from without. The Reformation made headway only where it gained the backing of the ruling prince or the local government. Said Melanchthon, Luther's wisest lieutenant, "Without the intervention of the civil authority, what would our precepts become? Platonic laws." Whereas in France, the state power was against it, it was drowned in blood and never rose again. In the case of the French Revolution, it was the armies of the Revolution, not its ideas, that penetrated throughout the whole of Europe. There was no question of intellectual contagion. Dumouriez protested that the French proclaimed the sacred law of liberty like the Koran, sword in hand. The threat of communism, at present, does not come from the forcefulness of its preaching, but from the fact that it is backed by one of the mightiest armies on earth. It also seems that, where a mass movement can either persuade or coerce, it usually chooses the latter. Persuasion is clumsy, and its results uncertain. Said the Spaniard St. Dominic to the heretical Albigenses, "For many years I have exhorted you in vain with gentleness, preaching, praying, and weeping. But according to the proverb of my country, where blessing can accomplish nothing, blows may avail. We shall rouse against you princes and prelates, who, alas, will arm nations and kingdoms against this land. And thus blows will avail where blessings and gentleness have been powerless." Section 87. The assertion that a mass movement cannot be stopped by force is not literally true. Force can stop and crush even the most vigorous movement, but to do so the force must be ruthless and persistent. And here is where faith enters as an indispensable factor. For persecution that is ruthless and persistent can come only from fanatical conviction. Any violence which does not spring from a firm spiritual base will be wavering and uncertain. It lacks the stability which can only rest in a fanatical outlook. The terrorism which emanates from individual brutality neither goes far enough nor lasts long enough. It is spasmodic, subject to moods and hesitations. But as soon as force wavers and alternates with forbearance, not only will the doctrine be repressed, recover again and again, but it will also be in a position to draw new benefit from every persecution. The Holy Terror only knows no limit and never flags. Thus, it seems that we need ardent faith, not only to be able to resist coercion, but also to be able to exercise it effectively. Section 88. Whence comes the impulse to proselytize? Intensity of conviction is not the main factor which impels a movement to spread its faith to the four corners of the earth. Religions of great intensity often confine themselves to contemning, destroying or at best pitying what is not themselves. Nor is the impulse to proselytize an expression of an overabundance of power, which, as Bacon has it, is like a great flood that will be sure to overflow. The missionary's zeal seems rather an expression of some deep misgiving, some pressing feeling of insufficiency at the center. Proselytizing is more a passionate search for something not yet found than a desire to bestow upon the world something we already have. The proselytizing fanatic strengthens his own faith by converting others. The creed whose legitimacy is most easily challenged is likely to develop the strongest proselytizing impulse. It is doubtful whether a movement which does not profess some preposterous and patently irrational dogma can be possessed of that zealous drive which must either win men or destroy the world. It is also plausible that those movements with the greatest inner contradiction between profession and practice, that is to say, with a strong feeling of guilt, are likely to be the most fervent in imposing their faith on others. The more unworkable communism proves in Russia, the more its leaders are compelled to compromise and adulterate the original creed. The more brazen and arrogant will be their attack on a non-believing world. The slaveholders of the South became the more aggressive in spreading their way of life, the more it became patent that their position was untenable in a modern world. If free enterprise becomes a proselytizing holy cause, it will be a sign that its workability and advantages have ceased to be self-evident. The passion for proselytizing and the passion for world dominion are both, perhaps, symptoms of some serious deficiency at the center. It is probably as true of a band of apostles or conquistadors as it is true of a band of fugitives setting out for a distant land that they escape from an untenable situation at home. And how often indeed do the three meet, mingle, and exchange their parts?